Hey everyone, happy Tuesday. We will let a couple minutes pass, just letting everyone get in and get settled. But, while we're waiting to get started, if you want to drop in the chat where you are calling in from and what organization you are with. I was just chatting with James. I'm calling in from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we literally maybe 30 minutes ago started to get our first snow. So that's not that exciting. I don't love snow. So hopefully you guys are enjoying nicer weather, or if you like snow, maybe you're happy. But I will be hibernating under my blanket for the next couple months. Awesome. Indiana, Wisconsin. Oh, snowing there too. James beat me to it. He's coming in from Ohio, and apparently they got their snow over the weekend. So I had a few extra days of sunshine, I guess, before it hit us.
Yeah, it was very unexpected last weekend.
Yes. I was supposed to go to the Steelers game on Sunday. For those of you, if you follow football at all, the Steelers are not having a great season. So I elected to not go because it was so cold. We ended up winning. So, maybe I should have gone, but
I say it's quite good to have an excuse to get out of that, but
yeah, I know. All right. It looks like attendees are still coming in. Someone just left Pittsburgh in May. Well, that was probably much nicer weather than it is now. We had a few team members that just moved from Boston to Pittsburgh, and to them, this is warm, I guess. But to me, I'm still pretty cold. But as you keep filtering in, just keep throwing in the chat where you're calling in from and what organization we're with. While we are having some more people come in, just to give a brief introduction, I am Melissa. I am the VP of Marketing and Strategy at DipJar. I have been with DipJar about 2.5 years now. I love our product. I found it when I was actually working in the nonprofit space and wanted to get gift jars for some of our events, just followed along with the company, and here I am 2.5 years later. I love working with all of our customers, all of you guys that are tuning in. We love hearing about your fundraising efforts, how we can help, make it even bigger and better every year, which is why I'm super excited to bring James in today to talk about your annual giving programs. I know we are probably well deep into your end of year giving, but it's always important to think about it as an annual plan. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to James. I will pop off screen, but if you have questions throughout, I will be monitoring the chat to do the best I can.
All right. Thank you, Melissa. A good afternoon, everyone. As Melissa said, I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio. I just moved here a week ago from Orlando, Florida. And what a terrible time of year it is to make a move like that. It was just cooling down from the summer. We were taking nice evening walks. It was so sunny, but it wasn't as warm as it had been in July and August. And then we decided we'd move back to Cincinnati, which is kind of a home for us. And we had snow on the ground, a couple inches, I'd say, last weekend. So that was not a fun start to our November. But I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, DipJar, for this opportunity to speak about pipeline development and annual giving. It really is one of my favorite topics to talk about. It's something I think is extremely important in all annual giving programs, no matter what kind of organization you're working with. I will say that can mean a whole lot of different things. And so sometimes, we need to get into the nuances of what pipeline development can truly mean, depending on the size and the type of organization you are. We're going to try to cover a lot of that today. I'm James Barnett. I'm an Associate Managing Vice President with BWF. We're an international fundraising consultancy firm. I'll talk more about that in just a moment's time. I've spent the last 15 years working in this sector, mostly as a practitioner, leading annual giving and marketing programs. My most recent role before joining the firm was with the University of Cincinnati and its associated academic health center. I led the annual giving and fundraising marketing program there. Really have, spent my time with BWF, working with clients to enhance and build their digital first fundraising and next gen annual giving programs. This is something I'm passionate about. It's something I enjoy doing. I love this industry. It's pretty much all I've ever done, all I'm qualified to speak about. So like I said, this is a big topic for me. I do. I like to start these things by just kind of covering an agenda, talking a little bit about what you can expect. This is the moment when you realize you're in the wrong lecture hall and you get up and try to sneak out the back because you're in the wrong class. Hopefully that's not the case. We're going to cover the what, the why, and the how today. So what does pipeline development mean? What does it mean to be a pipeline powerhouse? Why is this something you should care about? Why is it something you'd want to take away and try to incorporate into your annual giving program? And of course, how? How are you going to do this? We're going to approach the how question today from a very much a getting started standpoint. There's a whole lot you can do. What I think you'll take away from this session, and maybe we start with that big takeaway, is so much of becoming a pipeline-oriented annual giving program is about mindset. It's about the objectives. It's about the way you approach the work. There's a whole bunch of strategies and tactics and things you can do, but truly being successful in this space starts with how you approach the work. And so that is what we're going to talk a lot about today. So quick few notes on BWF. We have clients all over the world. Actually, I think this map is a little out of date. I have currently working with Ashesi University in Ghana. They're having their first giving day, first ever giving day this fall. We're working with that on that program with them. But yeah, we have clients on lots of different continents, about 200 different clients annually. We are a 40-year-old firm. We started our first ever project was a restoration fundraising campaign for the Statue of Liberty in New York City. Since then, we've really had a track record of innovation. The first ever higher education giving day was a BWF project. That was a year before Giving Tuesday existed. We also pioneered concepts such as digital gift offices and have been one of the leading voices in fundraising analytics. Our CEO, Josh Burkholz, he literally wrote the first book on fundraising analytics. He's a wonderful voice in this topic. So we have a deep bench of expertise, about 70 team members distributed, mostly in the United States and some in Europe as well. So when we talk about pipeline development, I think that we very often talk about annual giving as part of our pipeline. It's something you hear a lot throughout the industry. You hear it at conferences and conversations with colleagues. Everyone's got a story about the $10 donor who, 40 years ago, they made this gift of $10 and now they're the chairwoman of your board. They're one of your top volunteers. Then maybe you're giving hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars every year. And that's a wonderful story for every organization that has that donor. And some do. But how often is that actually happening in practice? And is it happening by chance because just out of coincidence these things have happened? Or are we being intentional about finding these people who can be our long-term supporters? Are we using our annual giving program to go out and find the next $10 donor? And maybe it's not a $10 donor, but go out and find that donor who is going to have a long-term, really meaningful relationship with the organization. I'm really interested in helping annual giving programs become the bedrock of a sustainable, future-focused fundraising operation. I think that's what annual giving's role should be in this industry. I talk often about a next-gen annual giving philosophy. What does that really mean? I think, healthy acquisition. This is, no gimmicks. It's not just a cash grab. We're talking about attracting new supporters who care about our mission, who want to be part of our team. These are the donors that you really want to partner with for the long term. And this doesn't mean there's anything necessarily wrong with a gimmicky fundraising, give to get campaigns. Sometimes there's a need for that, and we'll talk about revenue versus pipeline in terms of objectives and why things drive different tactics. But ultimately, if you want to have a sort of a pipeline powerhouse program, this acquisition needs to be targeting the right kind of donors. I think, next gen annual giving means a big emphasis on donor retention. The easiest way to grow is to take care of the donors you already have and build from that base. And I think that donors reward good behavior. They renew their support year after year because you treat them well, because you show them the impact that we're making together, and you acknowledge and recognize everything that they're doing in appropriate ways, and you make them feel like valued members of your community. So I think a high donor retention rate is reflective of having the fundamentals of your fundraising program in good shape. I also think next gen annual giving programs are reflective of the donor journey. This means understanding and acknowledging that giving is a process. There's a way that people learn about your mission. There's a way that people start to interact with you and your brand. And modern annual giving programs really respect that. And they don't just ask all day long. They acknowledge that people are at different stages in their life. There's things they want from you. There's a value that they seek, and you're reacting to that, responding to that in that donor journey, and not just blasting people with asks for money all the time. And then finally, a next gen annual giving philosophy is about long-lasting, sustainable relationships. Kind of back to the beginning of this conversation here. This is what creates a pipeline. Having a community of supporters who are with you today and for the future, that's what's really going to help. That's what a pipeline means. And so when I think about next gen annual giving, these are all of the factors that I think make for a healthy program. So, in the last sort of 10, 15 years, but more so perhaps in the last couple of years, there's been a whole lot of change in the world, big shifts. We call this the new era of engagement. I think most notably, the pandemic forced a mass adoption of things like video conferencing, Zoom calls. Hybrid work is normal now. Hybrid events are very normal now. And this is, I think it's fair to say a permanent change. I mentioned I just moved back to Cincinnati, and I was on the website of the Cincinnati Zoo yesterday looking to renew my membership. We'd let it lapse while we'd been gone from Cincinnati. And I noticed that they've added a virtual membership option, which is, a $25 a year membership dues. And it doesn't include any actual visits to the zoo, but it unlocks exclusive content and sort of unlocks access to this community. And I think that's a cool little thing. Something I noticed, but this sort of hybrid approach to everything now is here to stay, and people are used to that, and people are much more comfortable with things. So that has opened up new opportunities. Our attention spans seem to just get shorter and shorter. I don't know if that's true, or if it's actually just there's so many more distractions in the world. I think a lot of people, and I'm going to include myself in this, are completely addicted to our cell phones. I have a 2-year-old daughter, and I often say that I think her favorite toy is my iPhone, which is strange because she's never really been allowed to, she doesn't watch YouTube on it or anything like that. She never really plays with it, but she sees me use it. And I try to be careful. I try to do it subtly and not let her see me. But I'm so addicted to this thing that she just notices that I constantly get it out of my pocket and play with it. And so I think this is a very normal thing, that we're just living in a world where people are not reading all of your emails or your direct mail pieces, and they're just doing other things all the time. Lots of interesting studies about how people multitask when doing email as well. And then the normalization of digital first activity. This is something that certainly in the last 2 years increased its speed. You can buy houses online, looking at homes on Zillow, having FaceTime tours, never actually visiting a house in person. I've done that twice now. And it seems kind of crazy. 10 years ago, I think the idea of doing that, people would have laughed at, but actually people are very comfortable using digital tools for major, major life decisions. And so when it comes to your annual giving program, you need to think about that as well. People are very comfortable in that space, and they will not just make donations, but they'll interact with you in purely digital ways as well. So what all of this means is that donors really have new expectations. They are looking for meaningful engagement opportunities, ways to get involved with your organization that give something back to them, intrinsic value. They're looking for compelling content. Content is so important. It's perhaps one of the things I talk about with my clients the most, because it's often the thing that gets overlooked in an effective marketing program. It's like, we have all these cool strategies, we have it all planned out. We do not have enough content. We don't have enough time to produce content or the dollars to produce the content. That's something we shouldn't overlook, because it's more and more so people are looking for that and they're willing to pay for it. Subscription models for respectable news sites are very common. I saw a Facebook ad the other day for a service that was kind of cool. You may be familiar with it. They were trying to sell essentially content geared towards dads, where you put in your child's like birth date, and it would send you things like email reminders about their birthday, which I thought, well, I'd like to think I don't need that. But it also would, send me emails with like suggested activities to do based on your 2-year-old and your 12-month-old, and, different games you can play and ideas of fun days out and daddy days. And, they were charging a few dollars a month for this privilege. It's kind of a neat concept. And I think that this is something we overlook, how important content is and how meaningful that is to people. They want to binge on your content if they're engaged with your organization. Personal interactions, no more mass marketing. People want to believe that you are talking to them. They want to feel heard. They want to feel that you understand who they are. Curated experiences. People are looking for this all the time. Brands are offering this now. And so as nonprofits, we have to do the same. And then relevant and accessible information. We have to be able to tell our donors what we're doing with their money. We have to be able to illustrate impact in a really meaningful way. Because that's becoming a deal breaker for donors if we're not able to do that. So this is my thesis for today. I believe that your annual giving program has the potential to create sustainable relationships with major donors. But I do not think that this happens as naturally as we often think it does. I think that this is going to require intentional innovation to take advantage of this opportunity. I think we have to be very deliberate in our approach to engaging people who have the capacity and inclination to become major supporters. This all leads to a little bit of a conundrum when it comes to thinking about the purpose of your annual giving program. And this is where we get into what I was talking about with the mindset and the approach that you're taking. It is incredibly important to answer this question first and foremost before you think about becoming any sort of pipeline powerhouse, and we keep using that phrase. Most programs, I think, fall on a spectrum between revenue and pipeline. And so it's totally normal. It's okay to be somewhere in the middle of that, but you have to think about what that means. And if you're going to lean into one side of this and ignore the other side, or if you're going to try to do both, how do you accomplish that? So revenue programs, these are perhaps the most traditional way of thinking about an annual giving program. There's a need to generate funds right now for this year, current use. That's where the word annual comes from. It's annual use money, current use money. The need is really to raise money. We're going to allocate our resources. This means our time, our budget, where we put our priority. We're going to allocate those things to where we can make an immediate impact and show immediate returns. So if I have $1,000 to spend and a week's time, I'm going to need to spend that time and money on something that's going to generate money this year. And then there's an urgency to ask for donations. That's kind of been the traditional annual giving way. It's urgent because that's what our goal is, to raise money. If you think about a pipeline-oriented program, it's just a little bit different. The emphasis is much more on building for the long term. It's about having these sustainable long-term relationships. So in this kind of program, you're going to allocate your resources, that $1,000 in that week's worth of time. You need to allocate that to things that actually may pay off in the long run. It's okay if that doesn't raise money that you can spend this year. If you're investing in something that is going to generate money in the long run, it might be generating much, much more money, but it takes 5 years to come in. Now that's great, but we're going to talk about metrics today, and many, many annual giving programs are not measured for what they raise 5 years from now. In fact, very few annual giving programs that I've ever interacted with are measured that way. Most are going to be Success is going to be measured based on how much money did you raise this year. And that's where we start getting into a problem with saying, like, we're a pipeline oriented program. We are the foundation of fundraising. We build for the future. It's like, well, not really, because if your goal is to raise money this year, then you're going to need to do strategies and tactics that do that and not build for the future. Also in a pipeline program, sort of ideally, there's a much more freedom to focus on awareness and engagement building. I have a chart to show on my next slide, the fundraising funnel, where I think we're spending a lot of time on asking for money and not enough time on kind of creating awareness of our organizations. So these are the two things. Like I said, it's typical for an organization to say, well, we're somewhere in the middle. We're somewhere split between revenue and pipeline. But when you really dig into this, I think what we see over and over again is that measures of success are based on revenue primarily. Sometimes you see things like donor counts, arguable how much that is an indicator of pipeline. But yeah, so a lot of people want to be in the middle of this. There's not too many programs that are solely focused on the pipeline end, but I think that becomes challenging and it becomes a little bit of a conflict internally of how do you spend your time. There are very few annual giving programs out there that have unlimited resources or, ample resources. Most organizations are trying to do a whole lot with a little. And so how do you really do that if you're trying to be a pipeline program, but you also have this big need to generate funds right away? So if we start thinking about like what a pipeline powerhouse looks like, one way to visualize this is through the fundraising funnel. This is an ACE model that we created at BWF. It uses the 3 key steps of awareness, consideration, and engagement. It's all part of the donor journey as an individual learns more about an organization and eventually makes that decision to donate. So we use this as the framework for marketing projects with our clients. It works both in the traditional sense for appeal campaigns, like a multi-channel fundraising campaign. But honestly, it also works for thinking about mid-level and major gift fundraising work as well. So if you have colleagues in that space, this is the same kind of model that actually can work of engaging those prospects. So the donor journey starts in this awareness phase, and this is often overlooked. This is when an individual is learning about your organization. Now, this does vary a lot by sector. In higher education, the awareness phase is complicated because very often prospects have a degree from the school. And so it's easy to think, well, they're already aware. I think that's actually missing a step, though. We're talking about being aware of the philanthropy side of things, the need for the case for support. And obviously, if you're in a nonprofit space, and to some extent in the healthcare space, the awareness stage can mean literally like no concept of the organization at all. So people are learning about what you do. A lot of this work happens in the digital space. This is where maybe they learned about you on social media. They liked your page, possibly. They heard about you from a friend and then they Googled you. So if you think about that example I was talking about earlier with the, I got to remember the name of it, but the content piece for dads, I would be in the awareness phase. I just found out about this a couple of weeks ago. I haven't taken any action, haven't subscribed. I don't know if that's something I would do, but I've learned about it and I'm now telling other people about it. So yeah, maybe that's paying off for them. But I am firmly in that awareness stage. I haven't done anything else. Then you start to, as people interact with your brand, they move into the consideration phase. Maybe this is where they think about getting more involved. Could be that they think about volunteering, or they simply want to visit you. They maybe just spend more time on your website. But they're certainly starting to think about ways that they may become more involved in the organization. That certainly could be donating, but it isn't necessarily donating, but they're digging deeper. They're probably starting to like your social content more. Maybe they're commenting on things here and there, spending more time on your website, reading your emails in more detail. I am at this stage with the Cincinnati Zoo that I mentioned earlier. For whatever reason, I got distracted and didn't actually renew the membership yet. Fully intend to. I've sort of thought this through. I know I'm going to do this. And yet I haven't done it. And this is where it's a funnel. And this is why we have these little gaps between each stage, because there is a risk that I could fall out of the funnel at this point, even though I am 100% in my mind, I am 100% going to purchase this membership. I haven't done it yet. And there's always a risk that I just never get around to it. And so much of what we do in annual giving programs needs to address that work as well. And then a percentage of people, hopefully it's a high percentage, will actually end up engaging. This can take a variety of forms. I think often we think about this as donating. It doesn't necessarily have to be donating. It can happen in other ways as well. But again, at this stage in the game, your role as an annual giving program is to make things easy for them and to make sure there's no barriers, there's no friction, things that get in the way or make people change their mind. So from a marketing perspective, we think about the top of the funnel. This is like our warming campaign. This is where we are focusing our work on telling people about what we do. You need to be really impact oriented here. It's one thing to tell them that you exist and that you're a 501c3, but you also need to tell them about the impact of philanthropy and why donors can make a difference. Then move into a solicitation phase where we're actually asking for their support. And we, again, should always be leading with impact when we're making the ask, but we're actually trying to move people from the consideration phase. So at this point, if it's the zoo, they'd be kind of coming back to me, like asking me to make that membership purchase. And then we also need to have a recognition phase as well, making sure that as people have donated, we're responding quickly, acknowledging them in the appropriate way, recognizing for the support. We're trying to drive that loyalty so that they become recurring donors over time, not necessarily monthly donors, but repeat donors. Now, I think that a typical annual giving program spends a whole lot of time in this solicitation phase. And actually what I see very commonly is like all of the time spent there. I've certainly been guilty of this. Again, you've got limited resources, so you want to put those dollars into things that you believe are going to pay off immediately because you're a revenue-oriented program. So we're going to spend that money on maybe it's a mail piece, or we're going to spend that money on paid digital strategies, or we're just spending that money on time to be able to have staff to do the work. We immediately jump to solicitation very, very often, and we're missing the top and the bottom of the funnel. And I think that if we actually spend a little bit more time focusing on that awareness and consideration stage, we would see better results later down the road. But again, we're so wired towards what's the immediate payoff, and we therefore won't be able to do that. Now, this, I think, becomes critical to thinking about being a pipeline-oriented annual giving program, because if you're a pipeline-oriented program, you don't need to worry too much about what people are donating right away. You need to be thinking about what the long-term payoff is. So another way to think about the funnel is to think about it from a sort of a sales lead generation way. So again, this is certainly borrowing from the sales world, but we start with leads being generated. Now, this might just be list growth. It might just be people subscribing to your newsletter. It might be even just people liking you on social media. So they've sort of opted into things this way. We generate the lead. We then have a marketing qualified lead, which is where we've got sort of on paper that this person is qualified to be a donor. It might mean that we have some capacity information. It might be some inclination information, but it's all theoretical. It's all like this person fits into the models. We believe that they're qualified to become a donor. And then you move into the fundraising qualified lead. In sales, this would be called a sales qualifying lead. This usually would involve a one-to-one conversation with some sort of gift officer. Again, that depends on the organization. It might just be a phone call. It might be a visit. We've suspected that the prospect has the capacity and the inclination. Now we're going to test that. We're going to see if it's actually there or not, if they do actually have that interest and willingness to make a gift. So that's sort of a lead generation model. And we can do like a lead scoring as well to help us track this. Now, very few annual giving programs are going to approach the work from this way. And this is where I think there's a huge opportunity. If you can dedicate some time and resources to doing this work, you have the opportunity to generate more leads and to then qualify those leads and to make those referrals to gift officers in a way that's going to do a huge amount of good for the long-term fundraising of your organization. But like I said, it so often comes down to what you're measured for and what your objectives of your program are. And that leads me to, as we start to get into the how, I think the most important thing to keep in mind at this point is that you get what you measure. This is like so important. I've already made this point a couple of times. So I'm going to make it again. If your success of your annual giving program is based on the dollars you raise this year, it's going to be very difficult to actually become any kind of pipeline machine, because every dollar you spend on the pipeline is probably not resulting in a gift this year. Now, it's not always the case. And like I said, you can do both, but you're going to get what you measure. So the first thing you need to do if you want to become a pipeline powerhouse is to think about the metrics that you're using to measure that success. So I've sort of broken this into 3 stages, like a crawl, walk, run. Thinking about this a little bit anecdotally, I see some of my clients, many of my clients look at the number of donors they have in a year. That's a very typical sort of indicator of success. It may or may not be the goal of an annual giving program, but it's certainly what a lot of people will look at. I see some people looking at things like the number of donors at certain metric levels. I particularly like $100 and $1,000. Both of these are thresholds where retention rates tend to go up. Certainly, this can be unique to different organizations, but oftentimes you'll see a double-digit percentage increase when you get into that $100 threshold. So oftentimes we would expect to see a retention rate of over 60% for $100 donors, whereas under $100 donors, it's going to be in the low 50s very typically. And then when it gets to $1,000, that very often will be in the mid 80s in terms of the retention rate. So if you think about long-term, you think about building for the future and sustainable fundraising programs, if you can seek donors who are able to give $100 or $1,000, that's a great measure of success. I have a children's hospital client that we're working with. We're doing a large campaign this fall, and our target for the campaign is to get gifts of $250 or more. Now, we certainly, of course, will accept gifts of any amount, but when we laid out the sort of objectives of the campaign, we said we want to get people who have the ability to give $250 as a first-time, one-time gift. And we know we're not going to get a whole lot of those. We're going to get a lot of $25 and $50 gifts, but we're really going to be measuring the success based on how many $250 plus gifts we get, because that's such a solid indicator of long-term capacity. And this is a pipeline-oriented campaign that we're working on. And so we're not thinking about how much money we raise this fall. We're thinking about the leads we bring in, the way we grow the list, the prospects we can then deliver to development offices to build for the future. Certainly first-time donors, great measure of success. There's so much nuance in first-time donors. We could talk about this all day. I mean, that's a real simple way to look at it, just like how many first-time supporters do you have. Obviously, if you want to be a pipeline, you need to be growing your list. And then the donor retention rate, most programs are measuring this. I would encourage you to take a look at it based on the different giving levels that you have, but certainly you want this to be part of your basic metrics. So most programs are looking at some of these things, if not all of them. If we think about the next stage, what would be kind of the walk stage for metrics, thinking about things like from the fundraising funnel that we talked about. So the number of leads generated, this can be list growth. I don't see too many annual giving programs that actually report this on a regular basis of how much that list grew over time. The number of referrals that are made to gift offices. And then if you're able to put together lead scoring mechanisms, the numbers of marketing qualified leads and fundraising qualified leads. Sometimes that's just jargon. I mean, what we're talking about is like, okay, how many prospects did you bring in to your pipeline that were fed to gift offices? If you're the kind of organization that has major gift offices, that's important. And then where I think there's a lot of opportunity, I put this in the run stage. Some of these are not that much more complicated than the walk stage, to be honest with you. Measuring leads that actually resulted in closed gifts. So I have yet to see an annual giving team that is evaluated on how many major gifts were closed because of work they did over time. I think a lot of people would argue, well, that's not a very fair way to evaluate our success now, but it is a way to measure the success of a program. So it may not be a performance related metric, but there's two kinds of things you want to measure. You want to measure the performance of team members, but also you want to measure the effectiveness of a program. And it is very wise, I think, to look at how many of these leads are actually resulting in closed gifts. And maybe it's not entirely the annual giving program that's responsible for that, but that's a huge factor here. The giving level migration, something I really enjoy. I have a chart for you on the next slide that gives an example of that. It's kind of a visualization, a good BI tool. And then the lifetime donor value or the projected value. So don't see this used nearly enough. I think as you think about how to measure lifetime donor value, you're thinking about, okay, so if we get a new donor and that new donor gives $50, what is that donor likely to give over the course of their life? Now, you can come up with a vastly complex model for figuring that out. You can look at all kinds of things like their age, potentially, the amount of that gift, the averages of people who give at that level. You could even factor in things like zip codes. Most organizations don't have the sort of analytics and business intelligence capacity to be able to do that complexity of work. So there's much more simpler ways to do it as well. Take a look at what is a $50 donor who gave 5 years ago, what did they end up giving for the 5 years after that? And then just use that as your lifetime donor value. It's not necessarily lifetime, it's 5 years. You could do it over longer if you've got a long fundraising history. You can keep it fairly simple, but that's such a great way of reporting success. So instead of saying, the program brought in a $50 donor, maybe the program brought in a $300 donor, because that's the lifetime donor value. If you want to talk about pipeline and you want to be successful and show your success, you have to start using these kind of metrics that are not super intuitive to a typical revenue oriented program. So yeah, just want to show you this giving level migration chart, because I have in my career in annual giving found things like this to be incredibly useful. And I don't think they're as common as they could be. So this is an example showing giving from fiscal year 20 compared to fiscal year 21. Obviously, you just update those years as you go. It's previous year and current year. What you see along the left column is the amount giving in brackets or in buckets, in the first year. And along the top, you're seeing the amount giving in the same bucket levels in the following year. So theoretically, you want this sort of diagonal piece along the middle to be high, which, as you can see from this chart, most of these numbers are above 50%. There's a couple that aren't, but that is showing that people are giving at the same approximate level as the previous year. So if they gave $250 to $500, 67% of those gave at the same level the following year. You can also see that below that, people who gave $100 to $250, only 47%, and that's a 20-point drop from the other metrics. So you can start to see how effective things are being. In this column, the next, one over to the right, you're looking at how many people actually upgraded. So this is, in this example, people in the sort of 20% range or the teens upgraded from one bracket to another. So that's a good indicator. You want these ones to be as high as possible. That's an indicator that you're moving people through the pipeline. You're upgrading their giving in a meaningful way. That's a great indicator of future intent. On the flip side of that, if you move 2 spots over to the left, you're going to see people who are downgrading. So one that is jumping out, it's not even, on the bottom here, you can see people that gave over $2,500 in the previous year. 20% of those people gave less the following year. The one that makes me most concerned in this example is on the first column here. You can see that 20% of people who gave in the $100 to $250 range gave less than $25 the following year. So you got a problem there. It means people are giving less. As a general rule, if people are increasing their giving, that's a good thing. And if people are decreasing their giving, that's an indicating that they're getting less interested. So that's probably the most obvious thing anyone's ever said. But this is the kind of thing that it's not terribly difficult to make something like this. And you only you don't necessarily have to have this updating in real time. It's something, an analysis you can do once a quarter or at the end of the year to really understand how effective you're being at moving people through these different giving levels towards giving more and more. Something that is going to be critically important is to redefine the term return when we think about return on investment, ROI. I think a lot of annual giving directors, managers, team leads often share this frustration when a CEO or CFO or a board member says, well, what's the ROI? What's your cost to raise $1? And, this is a fair question. ROI is a very fair question. It's something we should ask, and it's certainly something we should look at. But cost to raise $1 is a great way to look at the effectiveness of a revenue-oriented program. It's a terrible way to measure the success of a pipeline-oriented annual giving program. So again, just like with your metrics, if you want to be a pipeline-oriented program, don't keep asking the question, what's the cost to raise $1? Because the return may not be dollars raised right away. You want to have that return defined as a metric that really demonstrates pipeline. So that's where things like lifetime donor value become. So in our example from earlier, the ROI, instead of being $50, would be $300 because we ultimately identified that a first-time donor of $50 is likely to give $300 over the next 5 or 10 years, whatever that was. If we've identified that, we can actually point to that as part of the ROI. Now, I'm not suggesting that's an easy conversation with your CFO or whoever is asking for this. But if they believe in this idea that your program is going to fuel the pipeline, they need to start acknowledging that success is going to be measured in a different way, and that ROI means something very different to cost to raise $1, because that's only going to tell you how good you are at bringing in money right away. I just realized I've got some funny little triangles on my screen that I didn't know were going to be there. Okay, so if we think about how do we put some of this into action, again, this is going to, a lot of nuance here, going to vary a whole lot by the type of organization, the resources you have, the capacity. But the first way I like to think about this is the easiest thing you can do, which is start taking a journey-based approach to all of your campaigns. So whether you're real simple, doing a few emails a year, or if you have some sort of vastly complicated direct marketing program, most organizations I come into contact with have some room to improve their journey-based approach. So that starts with the awareness phase. That means that we should be doing communications that we should not take for granted. They're not necessarily coming from anywhere else. Communication pieces and marketing work that is about educating your prospective supporters on your value as an organization, the impact you have, and the reasons that philanthropy is important, the way that it makes a difference. So you can automate some of this if you have the right tools in place, but this is about telling, it's about growing the interest, of your prospects. And you can certainly trigger this through actions like making a first-time donation or subscription. I do want to point out as well, if the first way that a donor interacts with your organization is to make a gift, so if you have no idea they exist and they make a donation online, that person, you should still, I think, put them in the awareness bucket. They're still not, I know they've already made that donation, but you don't really know what was going on there. And it's time to learn a little bit more about them. So I think the first thing I would want to do in that situation is still put them in the awareness piece, make sure you've got a content journey that is around growing their interest in the program, teaching them more and more about what you do, and begin to collect data on them as much as you're able to, given the tools you have, so that you learn more about their interests, their affinity, what their reason is for getting involved, and what they're looking for from you. And then as you move into the consideration phase, this is where you'd have that marketing qualified lead. You're going to start testing the interest and the affinity to the organization. So I think if you think about the content cadence at this point, you're looking at things that measure their interest in specific impact areas. So if you have a few different programs that you run out of your nonprofit, you can talk about those different ones and then measure which ones people are clicking on. So a great way to do that is just very simply through an email newsletter with intentionally having stories linked to different funding priorities, different programs that you have, and then seeing who clicks on each one. and taking that as some sort of indicator of interest in a specific thing, and then following up on that as you come to make your ask, making sure that you're continually talking about the thing that they have demonstrated an interest in. Talking about responsive personalization, more and more segmentation, and then pairing that engagement data with their capacity and other data so you get to understand who they are and what they're interested in doing. And then finally, you move into the engagement phase. This is where you are actually going to ask for that gift. Again, for many, many programs, the first step is asking for a gift. What I'm encouraging is that there's a couple of steps before that, where you spend a decent amount of time and energy growing the awareness, moving people through that consideration phase. And then as you ask, that ask will feel more genuine and likely be more effective as well. So you can attempt to personally engage prospects, especially if you're thinking about mid-level or major gift prospects, but that warming content can really continue. And then you have interactions that can help you document if things are a fundraising qualified lead. So to sort of begin closing us out here, I want to talk about a few different ways. I got 4 things of examples of the pipeline powerhouse in action. These can all kind of be tailored to you and your program and the kind of organization you are, but there's some things that you might want to think about implementing sooner or later. So the first thing is to refine your acquisition strategy. So here, think about the kinds of donors that you're trying to attract. Perhaps one way to think about this is that it's quality over quantity. And I know it's a little uncomfortable to think about like a quality donor. That's not really the right way to think about it, but the idea is the right idea. It's about finding people who are there for the long term, people who want to be part of your community, people who are looking for a long-term relationship with an organization and not just looking to, make a quick transactional thing. You can conduct a ideal donor exercise. This is where you can do this as simply as a brainstorming session with your team. You can do a whole bunch of data work as well to back it up. But I honestly would think if you spend a couple hours with your team thinking about the ideal donor exercise, you'll make a lot of progress on this. That'll be helpful. This is about being intentional about who you're targeting. So it's thinking about things like I mentioned, the Children's Hospital campaign we're working on. Our ideal donor was identified as somebody who could give $250 in a first-time gift. Now, it's ideal donor. It's not only donor. It doesn't mean we're not going to be very appreciative of a donor who is able to give us $25. That's still a wonderful thing. But we're building our campaign to target people who have the capacity to do more because we identified that person as our ideal donor, because what we're really looking for through this campaign is a pipeline machine that can feed our major gifts program for that organization. Second thing is to get to know your supporters. And I mean, really get to know. This is where you can use a lot of tools and technology available today to find out things about who your supporters are. And there's some different activities or exercises that you can do. You want to understand, well, first of all, what data is available from your mid-level and major gift prospects that you already have, or your current supporters at that level. What defines them? How are they different to your base level donors? Is it their engagement is different? Is it, obviously the capacity weighs into things, but that's usually not the only factor. Is it about proximity, like where they live? What are those factors? What motivates them? What are they interested in? You can do an experience mapping exercise, which is a way to better understand the ways in which your supporters interact with you and how they want to be involved. So this is kind of thinking about like life stage. It's about the process. So the first thing somebody might do is to find out about you and to Google you, and then they spend time on your website, understanding what's feeding into that consideration phase. For certain organizations, the next step at this point is that people would volunteer. So there's some organizations where people volunteer their time before they make a donation. It's typical. There's other organizations where there's certain literature that, especially with certain religious organizations, if there's specific books or things that people have read, it becomes more likely that people make a donation. So that's part of the experience mapping exercise, understanding what the thought process is for somebody, what that journey looks like for somebody who's getting more and more involved in the organization. And then you can do some persona development as well. Personas are sometimes overcomplicated in how they're talked about. I think they're actually a fairly simple tool. You can certainly take a whole bunch of data and back this all up with very scientific measures. If you have the resources to do that, great. If you don't, I did this with a client just a few weeks ago. You can still spend some time talking through talking through and developing personas and testing things out, and you'll still, even if it doesn't feel super scientific, you'll still find it can be quite an effective way to do it. The idea of a persona is that it's a tool for messaging, for when you're doing your creative work, when you're writing an appeal, you're writing essentially to an audience of one. So when you develop that persona, it's about looking at who your typical supporter is and what they are interested in and what they're motivated by, and then channeling that information when you are targeting, when you're writing your appeals. Third thing is to focus on the donor experience. So going back to retention, such a critical component here. I really do think retention is such a good such a good measure of the health of your fundraising program, the health of your annual giving program, especially because donors will reward good behavior from fundraisers. And so that means if you're rewarding loyalty, if you have the wow factor, sometimes it's little things that go a long way, but if you're acknowledging people appropriately, if you're telling the right stories of impact, your retention rates will be higher. That's a solid foundation. That's the bedrock of becoming a pipeline powerhouse, I believe. And then the last thing is to focus on engagement-driven marketing. So this is about the journey. It's using that ACE model of awareness, consideration, engagement, remembering that you are chasing the engagement piece, whatever that means, usually giving, not always giving, but it doesn't start with that. One way to think about this is, this is one of the most valuable lessons I learned in fundraising is if you meet somebody new, you don't go, you go out to them with your hand out like that to shake their hand. You don't go up to them with your hand, with your palm facing up. That's a handout that you're looking for. In fundraising, we so often, instead of going up with our hand to shake somebody's hand, we go out with our hand up. The first thing we do is ask them for money. That almost never feels good to the person on the receiving end of that, even if it works, even if they make that donation. We could talk all day about tactics that have been effective, such as phone programs that pressure people into making donations. They're sort of effective in the short term in that they raise money right away. Does that facilitate long-term relationships with donors? I'm not so sure. And so the kind of thing I think we should think about is like, how do we lead with really authentic engagement-driven marketing? What does that look like? And making sure you're putting that into action. So that's what I have for you today. Thank you for taking the time. It's like I said, a topic I care a lot about and find really interesting. There's a whole lot more we could always talk about when it comes to the how and how you actually bring this to life. But I think just to reiterate the point that the first thing you're going to have to do is think about what you're being measured for and what your objectives of your program are. And so if you're having a conversation with your leadership and they're saying, where's the pipeline? This annual giving program needs to be generating more referrals for our gift officers. Yes, absolutely. That's a good thing. Let's talk about what success looks like. Let's talk about metrics and how we're incentivizing the program to succeed. Thanks for the time today.
Yeah, awesome, James. Thank you so much. I don't know if I shared earlier, but I still sit on the board for 2 nonprofit organizations, and I think I learned a lot. So I'm assuming everyone that joined us today did learn a lot. We have a few minutes. If anybody wants to throw any questions in the chat for either me or James, but also just a reminder that you will get a recording of this webinar. So I'm sure a lot of you are going to want to share what you learned today with your teams and kind of refer back to it as you think about putting these practices in place. So we'll make sure you get that recording. But if there's any questions now, feel free to throw them in the chat. I'll give you guys a few moments to do that.
So is it still snowing there?
Yeah, it's gotten worse, actually. It's actually snowing and sticking. It's kind of bizarre. I really expected it just to kind of melt away very quickly, but I guess not.
Yeah.
All right. So it looks like Thomas White asked, can you walk through the basics of a lifetime value score? What do we use at minimum data point?
Yeah. So again, this is one of those, like many things, you could make it super complicated, and that's not what a lot of places are looking to do. So one way to do this would be to start out by taking, if you think back to the different bucket levels we had on the migration chart, you could use those buckets as your sort of primary levels. And you say somebody that gives at this level, you need to go back to your data. So I would take 5 years worth of data or 10 years worth of data, go back to, what are we in 2012, and say everybody who gave for the first time $100 to $250 over the next 10 years gave an average of $500, if that's what your data shows. Or if they gave under $25, they gave an average of $40 over the lifetime. And what you'll more than likely see, and you definitely, if you do averages, think about medians perhaps, because you could certainly throw that off with some outliers. What you'll likely see is that people giving very small first-time gifts really don't move much beyond that, which is why I start with that story of the $10 donor who, this sort of romanticized version of the $10 donor who becomes like a Michael Bloomberg and gives millions of dollars. It doesn't really happen very often. Actually, that $10 donor usually ends up giving less than $100 in their lifetime. And so it's not going to be the case for everyone, but very often that's the kind of thing we see. So I hope that kind of answers the question. Essentially, I would just do an analysis over 10 years. It's not going to be like the most scientific way, but it's a starting point. And if you find that to be an effective metric, if you find it to be something that your leadership is responding well to, then you can spend the time to really dig into it in more detail.
He said, yes, thanks. So awesome. Another question says, may seem odd, but how important are vision and long-term objectives and fundraising in general and repeat donations? Is day-to-day operations as easy to raise for than long-term projects?
Yeah. So I think, I don't know, this may not be the right way to answer this question, but one of the things I think about is how effective the sort of leadership of an organization. I'm not talking about your chief development officer. I'm talking about like a chief executive officer of a nonprofit. The way that that person can articulate their vision for the organization is hugely important in terms of repeat donations. I think it's easy in some ways for certain organizations to create some urgency to make a one-time gift and to kind of create a transactional program where you tell people about something's happening, we need $50 today. And you see a lot of this in like disaster relief. But people don't have that long-term thing. They're just helping out because they can, and they're not going to give to that same thing years down the road. If you're able to actually articulate that vision, I think that's hugely important in terms of having long-term supporters, because at the end of the day, donors who are really committed to your organization probably don't mind so much helping to fund those operations. Actually, donors who aren't that into you, that don't know that much about you, that's not very interesting to them. They want to make a big difference. They want to learn more. And so, funnily enough, often in annual giving programs, we're talking about raising money for operations to the people who really aren't that interested. And we go to people who are highly engaged with the most interesting projects. Maybe one way to do it is to flip the script on that and think about, why don't we take the most interesting most interesting fundraising opportunities to the people who haven't actually engaged with us yet, try to get them to become long-term repeat supporters. And then in terms of raising money for the operations, the people who really, really care about you, they're the ones who will actually fund that most likely.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I know, like, so often your, supporters are on your email listserv and you're sending them like the real cool highlight stories of what you've done, but you're not really thinking about how to share that with the people that don't know about you. So it is definitely an interesting thing to kind of flip that and see how can you get those interesting stories out to the people that don't know much about you and get them engaged.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I think that's kind of it on time. We've got 2 minutes left. So I just wanted to thank everyone so much for joining us and hanging on for the quick Q&A at the end. I will absolutely share the recording of this and, information about how you can get in touch with James and BWF after this. But thank you guys so much. And James, thank you so much for this awesome webinar today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a good week.
Bye-bye.